Welcome, everyone. We're so thankful that you've joined Operation Parent and Dr. Lauren Hartman this afternoon. Operation Parent is a nonprofit built on one simple belief: conversations matter. We help parents and caregivers feel more confident having real, everyday conversations with their kids, especially about today's toughest topics. Because when those conversations happen early, they make a lasting impact. That's why we are offering webinars like this one to share practical tools and expert guidance so you can feel more prepared and, most importantly, supported. July 21st, Truth Initiative will help us understand today's nicotine and quitting resources. As schools across the country introduce cell phone bans and new phone policies, many families are seeing both benefits and challenges at school and home. So we hope you'll join us for our Back to School webinar on August the 25th. We will be discussing all of this with another expert pediatrician, Dr. Molly O'Shea, along with the team members from the American Academy of Pediatrics. You can register both now, easily and quickly, using this pop-up. Today, we're going to talk about From the Table to Self-Talk, Reframing Food and Body Confidence for Youth. And luckily, we have Dr. Lauren Hartman here. She is the founder of Aspen Grove Adolescent Medicine. She's double board certified in adolescent medicine and pediatrics and specializes in eating disorders. She is known for her patient-centered approach, which emphasizes each patient's strengths, fosters hope, and supports them in living healthy and very fulfilling lives. She is a long-standing member and contributor to many professional organizations: the Society of Adolescent Health and Medicine, the Academy of Eating Disorders, SAHM Eating Disorder Committee, and the Association for Weight and Size Inclusive Medicine. She recently published her outstanding book, Freeing Children and Young Adults from Shame, Scales, and Stigma. It's a valuable resource for parents, educators, and clinicians. I found the conversation prompts, scripts, and strategies especially relevant and helpful for navigating difficult discussions at my own home about bodies, food, and health. Lauren's medical expertise and compassionate approach supported me as a reader throughout the entire book and through every chapter and exercise. Welcome, Dr. Hartman.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Michelle. And it is such an honor to be here and to be collaborating with Operation Parent. I also have to say those talks that you have lined up for July and August sound incredible and so relevant and so timely. So thank you for doing those, putting that out there. And the other part of my bio is that I am a mom of 2 teenagers. So I understand May and the busyness that we're all feeling as parents, and the hustle and bustle. And so I hope some of you can take this next 90 minutes and have it be for you and take an exhale, because we as parents are working really hard right now. The other thing I would mention is that I recently took an improv class, and this is something that a friend suggested I do, and I thought it was going to be really helpful for my work that I do with teenagers, and it was a complete joy. So if any of you are ever thinking about it, I would totally recommend it. The beauty of improv is you don't have to be good at it. There's like no test, you just show up, and it's a total pleasure. So as Michelle mentioned, my private practice is called Aspen Grove Adolescent and Young Adult Medicine. And I don't know how much of you all know about aspen trees, but I first learned about them a couple of years ago. And I found myself completely exhaling, because aspen trees are not individual organisms. they are actually completely interconnected through their root system. And they share resources, and they share nourishment, and they share strength, and they share resilience. And when I learned that, I felt a tremendous amount of relief, because I was like, oh, right, that's actually how we all exist too. We're not here doing this alone. Thank goodness. We have so many people around us and supports. And of course, when patients and families present to my practice, I really want them to know that they're not alone, but I also want you all to know you're not alone in this. There's so many resources like Operation Parent, which is incredible. So just remind yourself that we're in this together, and we are a grove all doing our best and learning together. So as Michelle mentioned, I recently published a book, Freeing Children and Young Adults from Shame, Scales, and Stigma. And the goal was really to have this be a practical guide so that adults who care deeply about children can help build healthy relationships for kids in their life in terms of food and exercise and body image, without feeling fear and without feeling shame. And there's so much confusion right now in terms of food and body. And so I hope that this distills it and really challenges weight stigma, and helps us help kids feel safe and trusting in their own body so they can really feel free. So some of the key takeaways that I hope you get from today is first to learn some practical evidence-based strategies to foster healthy attitudes towards food and body at home. And this is, yes, for kids, but it's also for yourself. So really for all ages. I want you to feel more confident in understanding eating disorders so that you're able to identify early warning signs so you know when and how to seek help, and really gain confidence in passing along a healthier legacy with your kids and youth in your life while filtering out some of the negative noise that we're all getting. And speaking of healthier legacy, I grew up in a home that looked like this. And some of you, this might be resonating with some of you at home, where there was a scale really featured prominently in the bathroom. It's actually still there today, which is kind of sad. And there were diet foods sort of throughout the pantry, and everything that said, diet soda, fat-free, sugar-free. We had this Snackwell cookies, and we didn't have real butter. We had butter spray. And I bring this up really just to normalize that so many of us have absorbed some of these messages. And again, this is an opportunity to say, yes, I know, and I know my parents were doing their best with the information they had, and we have an opportunity to shift our legacy. So with that, we're going to do a poll, again, completely anonymous, but this is just to see how this is resonating for some of you and if any of these statements are kind of hitting home. So please mark all that apply. I'll read them through, and Michelle's going to give us the tallies. So you grew up in a household with dieters or diet food. As I said, you grew up in a household where people talk negatively about their own bodies. You grew up in a household where people talk negatively about other people's bodies. You may have said the wrong thing about food or bodies in front of your kids. Or you worry that you might say the wrong thing. This is a tricky conversation about food and bodies in front of your kids.
We're having excellent participation. So still coming in, but 70 folks, 61% said I grew up in a household where dieters or diet food. 103 where people talk negatively about their own bodies. That's gone up to 117 already. 113, 59% grew up in a household where people talk negatively about other bodies. And then 108 may have said the wrong thing about food bodies in front of my kids. That's 50%. And then I worry that I might be saying the wrong thing in front of my kids. 127, 57%.
Thanks, Michelle. So you're in the right place if any of these statements resonated. And, I do think this highlights that most of us were never taught how to say the right thing and how to have these conversations around food. So hopefully you can get something from today's conversation. And while we talked about homes, what I realized and why I included three settings for my book, home, schools, and the doctor's office, is because we can do really well at home, but our kids exist in an ecosystem. So we also have to think about how to make our schools a safer, more inclusive, kinder place for kids. And, what I will say in terms of schools is, I took care of a patient a couple years ago who came in to see me for an eating disorder. And when I asked about where it all sort of started or if she had a sense about it, she said she actually learned about nutrition in health class. And she learned that sugar was bad. And so she took that advice and she went home and she said, I don't want to be bad, I want to be healthy. And she started to make some shifts. And, this highlights the fact that, one, adolescents need a tremendous amount of nutrition. And so for her, who shifted out sugar out of her diet, that then led to decreasing all sorts of carbohydrates. And she quickly became unhealthy in terms of losing weight, in terms of developing an eating disorder. So we just want to be really thoughtful about what our kids are learning in school. I also have seen ways in which kids have developed eating disorders after things that happened in PE, where maybe they have gotten weighed as part of their PE test, and that has been a really traumatic experience, weighed publicly. And the other thing that I'm hearing a lot these days from my teen patients is nobody eats lunch at school. And I really think this is an opportunity to shift this. Like, school is where our kids are spending so much of their day. And so if we can help them have really healthy, supportive practices at school, that matters. And then I had to include the doctor's office in my book. And, my first day of medical school, 25 years ago, the dean of our medical school said to us, 50% of what you learn in medical school is later going to be disproven. And the dilemma is that we don't know which 50% that is. And I thought that was really important that he said that, because it helped me remember and has helped me remember to stay open and to the fact that a lot of medicine changes and a lot of what we know changes, and it's completely evolving field. And so some of the ways in which we were taught in medicine was to focus on weight and to focus on BMI. And we know now that that is not helpful, and that actually can be harmful. And what has been interesting to me since I wrote this book are how many people have come up to me and shared stories about what happened to them or what happened to their child at their doctor's office. So I'm really wanting this to be a guide for doctors and healthcare to make the doctor's office be really healing and supportive and inclusive. So what is the medical truth when it comes to weight and health? Because I think there's a lot of confusion here. So first, what I just want to say really clearly is that weight-based approaches do not work. Most diets, 95% of diets, fail. And that has nothing to do with willpower or discipline. That is because of biology. Bodies, due to genetics, due to biology, due to body composition, tend to want to be at a certain weight. And when we sort of try to suppress that one way or the other, the body doesn't like that and tends to wanting to get back to its natural healthy set point. So it just doesn't work to just suppress nutrition. And we know that weight-focused approaches actually cause harm. It is not helpful to have a focus be around weight. And we have seen that where when people are experiencing weight stigma, Similar to other forms of discrimination, they develop depression and anxiety and substance use and eating disorders. And while we often think about weight causing high blood pressure or high glucose, actually weight stigma is an independent risk factor for that. It also leads to thyroid disease and chronic pain and infertility, because what stigma does is it's a stressor. And so it increases our cortisol level and increases our C-reactive protein, and this results in systemic inflammation and harm to our body. So really, I'm trying to talk about strategies to decrease stigma and decrease that stressor on the body. And then what about BMI? You know, BMI is something, unfortunately, that I still see used somewhat as a gold standard, and it really was never intended to be a marker of individual health. And, you know, it's problematic for many reasons. First of all, it ignores muscle mass, it ignores bone density and genetic differences. It also actually ends up completely misclassifying people who are healthy as unhealthy based on their weight or BMI, and it misses people who actually need medical support because we're saying, oh, they're in the lower weight, we don't need to do lab screening. And a large study found that 1/2 of people who are in the overweight category based on BMI and 1/3 who are in the obese category based on BMI are actually completely metabolically healthy, meaning cholesterol is fine, glucose is fine, blood pressure is fine. They do not need special support in that regard. And 1/5 or 20% of people who are in this normal weight category actually have metabolic problems. So if we're using weight or BMI as something to determine whether or not we do lab screening, we end up causing harm on both sides. And instead, I advocate for focusing on health markers that are actually meaningful, because weight is not a behavior and is not a helpful thing to be really focusing on. But what does matter is blood pressure, assuming we're using an appropriate size blood pressure cuff, focusing on blood sugar and how to stabilize that, focusing on cholesterol, mental well-being, aiming for stress management. I know easier said than done these days, but really everything that we can do just to support our own stress. Ensuring we have energy to do the things we love. One of the most heartbreaking things I see for patients who present to me with eating disorder is they have no energy. They feel terrible. They don't have the energy to do the things they love. Aiming for sleep quality. If we can improve our teens' sleep, they feel and function so much better. And it's really helpful for their health. And social connections and ensuring that people have access to healthcare and preventative screenings. What we know and what studies have found is that when people worry about feeling stigma or feeling weight shame at the doctor's office, they're going to avoid going altogether. No surprise. So we want the doctor's office to feel healing and inclusive. This is a study that I love so much. This is the study that was done in the 1970s, and it's the rabbit study. And they did this study. I love when studies are looking for one outcome and find another. So what they were looking at with this study is they wanted to see what was the impact of high saturated fat diets on cardiovascular health. So they took a group of rabbits and they fed them the same high fat diets. And then they measured things like cholesterol and blood pressure and atherosclerosis. And what they found was there was one group of rabbits that was significantly healthier, like 60% healthier. And they were confused by that because they were like, doesn't make any sense. They're the same, they're genetically identical. They're being fed the exact same diet. They're in the same cages. So moving the same. But what they found was this one group of rabbits that was so much healthier actually was assigned to a lab technician that was an animal lover. And when she was feeding the rabbits, she was actually holding the rabbits and she was petting the rabbits and talking to the rabbits. And what this taught us was actually there's a lot more that goes into health than what you eat and how you move, but rather stress and kindness and love really matters. So, I think about this a lot when we make mealtime so stressful, or we kind of put foods in categories and make people feel bad if they've eaten some delicious food, and like, oh, how do we actually decrease the stress around that so people can remember that mealtime is meant for enjoyment and is meant for connection, but not meant to feel stress. And so when we talk about some of these strategies and we talk about some of the ways in which to shift the narrative in our own home and shift the legacy for our own children, I think it's really important for us to just start by having a tremendous amount of compassion for ourselves and for those who came before us. We are all doing our best in a pretty fat phobic world, and we are just trying to keep our kids safe. And so some of the things, maybe we've said the wrong thing, but we have a great opportunity to do better. And we just have to start by just knowing that we said the wrong thing, but we were doing our best, and we can continue to adjust. So here's a little mnemonic that I hope is helpful that I include in the book, just to help us, like, where do we begin? And, the mnemonic is mother, but this is for all gendered parents and all sorts of caregivers. But, and I'm going to go through each one, but just want to name them. So M is for modeling a healthy relationship with food and your body. O is for open, supportive communication. T is for teaching body neutrality and acceptance. H is for health rather than weight. And ER of mother is for educational resources. So let's dig into the M. The M is the most important thing. So if you take one thing away from this, take the M. It's how do we model it with ourselves? And, adolescents are really smart. And so the old, like, do as I say, not as I do thing doesn't work for them. So we can't expect that we are criticizing our own bodies and then expect our kids to love theirs. So we really want to model for them what it looks like to eat for nourishment and enjoyment and not guilt or shame, and just really trying to quiet the noise or quiet the comments. Teach them that we don't have to love our bodies necessarily, to treat it with kindness and to treat it with respect. And aiming to focus on how our body functions, but not just our appearance. So we're not just criticizing our body, but rather like, wow, look what my body can do. How incredible. Look what your body can do. Aiming for joyful movement, and of course, seeking help if needed. A lot of parents come to me and say, well, I have a really screwed up relationship with my body. So how am I supposed to parent my kid? And I think the first thing is just naming that. And sometimes that means getting extra support for yourself. And kids really value that, of like, you know what? And saying it to your child, like, I don't have a great relationship with my body, and I want to do better. And I want to learn how to be more respectful for my body. And so I'm actually going to get some more help for myself around this. The O of mother is open, supportive communication. Most of us don't do well when we are anticipating this like really intense, interrogative kind of conversation. So we want to make conversations around food and body, which can be sensitive, as easeful as possible. And so things that tend to be helpful are having to be side by side. So you're not just like staring at each other during this conversation. Aiming to be private. So if we're having concerns and we're going to be talking about sensitive topics, not doing it in front of the siblings, in front of friends, trying to do this without screens present, trying to make these moments stress-free and relaxed, but not bring up concerns about food at mealtime. I would say doing it in the car, on a walk, other times. And here was a quote from a parent of a middle schooler who said, I've noticed my 12-year-old opens up most when we're in the car together. Something about not having to make eye contact seems to help him talk about harder topics, like how he feels about his changing body. On a side note, I know I mentioned I have a teenager. My 16-year-old recently got her driver's license, and I'm like really bummed that I no longer get to drive her to practice, because that was when I could kind of ask my questions and feel like we could get into some of these topics. But walks help too. And so what are some indirect approaches? Sometimes approaching topics obliquely can feel a bit safer for parents and children. And I don't want you to feel like, oh my gosh, I have to do all of these things. Not at all. Take what works. There's lots of examples thrown out here, lots of examples in my book. And I just want people to use what feels true and natural for you. So for some of us, it's like doing the third person framing. Like some kids feel a lot of pressure about how their bodies look. Is that something you've noticed at school? What's your school like in terms of body pressure? Or using your own past experience and saying something like, when I was your age, I remember feeling self-conscious about my stomach, my thighs, my arms, whatever it is. Has anything like that ever happened to you? Have you ever felt that? Or using friend experiences like, hey, I was talking to Gina's mom, or Gina, whose child has been feeling uncomfortable about their body changes. Have any of your friends mentioned feeling that way? And using that as an example. And then sometimes we want to be a little bit more direct, but aiming to try to be direct, but doing it in a gentle way. So people aren't feeling accused because then they're going to get defensive and clam up, but rather starting with something more that's like observation based, like, hey, I've noticed you've stopped eating breakfast. Can we talk more about that? Or what's going on about that? Are you not hungry in the morning? Let me know. That's what I'm seeing, but tell me what you're feeling. Or permission seeking, where you say, I'd like to talk about how things are going with food and body image. Would that be okay to discuss now, or would you like another time? And what I like about that is you say, would you like another time, or is another time better? Because they're never going to want to talk about this. So if you say, just say, well, is it okay if I talk about that? They may say no, but you say, do we want to discuss it now, or is there another time that we should plan to discuss it? The other thing that can be effective is just leading with your own vulnerability. Sometimes I struggle feeling good about my own body. I wonder if you've ever had thoughts about that too. Or situation-specific inquiries like, hey, after the doctor's appointment yesterday, I realized we didn't talk about how you felt about what the doctor said about growth charts. I wanted to check in about that. And I think that is incredibly helpful. It's just like after an experience happened, check in with your child, maybe even in the car ride home of like, hey, how was that for you? Because that didn't feel good for me, but I'm curious how that felt for you. And then the T of mother is teaching body neutrality and acceptance. There is so much misinformation in our diet-focused culture. And so children are hearing a ton of information or absorbing a ton of information on social media or online. And so hearing things from a trusted adult really matters. And so saying things like helping them understand what bodies in general, bodies come in all different shapes and sizes. That's what makes us unique. We're not all supposed to be one body size. Or saying something like, hey, bodies are amazing because of what they can do, not how they look. If your child has negative body thoughts, we can say something like, hey, I hear you're feeling uncomfortable about your body right now. Those feelings are okay to have. Or it's normal to notice differences between other people's bodies. Those differences don't determine anyone's worth. And then another strategy is just to promote their own functionality over appearance. So you say, oh, your brain is working so hard to learn these new skills. Like, that's important. We need fuel for your brain to learn these new skills. Or your body is helping you do all the things you love, like dancing and running and drawing. So your body, again, is there for function. Your body is not there to be critiqued and criticized. And, it's really helpful when our kids are coming to us with body concerns to not freak out. I think sometimes it's like, oh God, what am I going to say? How am I going to say it? So I would say just taking a breath and trying to just like start with some curiosity of like, tell me more about what you're thinking and what you're worried about. And then letting them experience the fact that like we can handle these conversations and we can navigate it together. And then, after we're establishing that bodies are acceptable in all sizes, The other thing that is really helpful is for kids to understand that in our home, health matters, not weight. And so saying things like, we don't focus on weight because you know what? My parents spoke to me about weight and it didn't make me feel good. And I don't want that for you. I care deeply about your health, but I don't care about your weight. Or saying something like, in our family, we focus on being strong and healthy, not on weight or body size. Or being healthy includes how we talk to ourselves, using kind words about our bodies, and a healthy habit, just like eating vegetables or getting enough sleep. And again, just remembering that's a habit. So the more we can speak kindly to ourselves, the more naturally it becomes. And again, that's why I included some of these quotes or some of these scripts so people can practice and see what feels most natural. The other part of health is just helping our kids redefine what health is. So helping them understand that health is not a number on a scale. It just isn't. It's not a clothing size. It's not whether or not you've eaten clean foods or salads. I can tell you from experience of working with eating disorder patients, they all come in saying that they want it to be healthy. And then what they present to me is not healthy at all. So we just want to redefine what health is. It's not looking a certain way. It's not never eating dessert or junk food, but rather health is having energy for the activities you love. Health is eating a variety of foods to nourish and to satisfy you. Health is moving in ways that feel good. It's getting enough sleep and rest. It's managing stress and emotions, and it's having supportive relationships, and really distilling it down to how do you want to feel? I think this is a really helpful question if you're, again, just taking away some nuggets from this. I know it's a lot of information, but just like, how do we want to feel? I want to feel energized. I want to feel well rested. I want to feel like I have the fuel to think and to engage in life. And so that's going to take eating balanced, nourishing foods. And the ER of mother is educational resources. Luckily, we don't have to have all this information in our brains. We don't have to have all the answers. There are tons of brilliant resources that are available on this topic. And here are just some recommended books. Love Your Body. The great one, that's great for elementary school age kids. The one I love for teens is called No Way, A Teen's Guide to Positive Body Image, Food, and Emotional Wisdom. There's also great programs and workshops. There's the Confident Body, Confident Child workshop, and great online resources. NADA, in particular, the National Eating Disorder Association. Okay, so we're going to now dig into eating disorders and debunk some myths. And I think myths are important to debunk because, one, they're not true. But also what myths do is they keep people from getting the care that they need. And what we know about eating disorders is the earlier we intervene, the better. And the better the prognosis and the better the decreased morbidity and mortality. Okay, so myth number one is I can identify someone as having an eating disorder just by looking at them. And that tends to, the myth that sort of is pervasive here is people tend to think they're going to be a girl, they're going to be white, they're going to be thin-bodied. And again, what that myth, that's a myth. That's not what eating disorders look like. And this myth has kept people from getting screened and getting the treatment that they deserve. So this was a study we did a couple years ago that looked at nearly 5,000 adolescents who had an eating disorder. So it wasn't just general population. These are people who were presenting to care for an eating disorder. And what we found was that 80% of the patients presenting were not underweight. So think about that. 80% are not underweight, are not in these thin bodies that we might associate with having an eating disorder. In that same study, we found that more than half of the children with eating disorders are racial or ethnic minorities. And youth of color actually were less than half as likely to receive the recommended treatment as white youth. So again, we really want to make sure, why I want to talk about these myths is I want to make sure everybody's getting screened and everybody's getting the treatment that they need. The other myth that I hear a lot is that eating disorders don't impact boys. I gave a talk recently and a mom came up to me afterwards and said, I really enjoyed your talk, but luckily I don't have to worry about that because I have sons. And I thought, oof, you do actually. At least 1/3 of eating disorders impact boys. And because of the myths and because of the stigma, they're a lot less likely to get diagnosed. There's also something we're seeing a lot now, which is called muscle dysmorphia. The other terms for that are bigorexia or reverse anorexia. And this is when people are perceiving themselves to be smaller than reality or not muscular enough. And unfortunately, it's similar behaviors as an eating disorder. So there's obsessive exercise, there's restrictive eating, and these changes can quickly lead to severe medical complications. So we want to be on the lookout for that. Myth number 2 is that eating disorders impact teenagers, but not kids in elementary school. And, when I talk to young people who come in to see me with an eating disorder at older teens, and I'll ask them, when did this first begin? They'll say, I started hating my body in kindergarten, or I started to have body concerns as early as I can remember. And I see people as young as 6 years old who are struggling with an eating disorder. So this is something that we do see, and all eating disorders impact young kids. And so it's younger and younger. And so we just want to be really thoughtful about how we're talking around children of all ages in terms of body and food. And finally, myth number 3 is it's really healthy to just cut out sugar and do intensive exercise. I live and practice in Northern California, and it tends to be a pretty health-focused community that somehow has vilified sugar. And, as I said from my example of what happened of that patient at school where she learned sugar is bad. Sugar is not bad. Our bodies actually need sugar. Our brains need sugar. And, so really trying to not vilify one food or another food group. What we know is that, when we kind of make these food categories, they tend to be the foods that we actually really are then going to crave. So, I showed you what my household looked like growing up. I knew the households where I could then go and get real butter and get preservatives, because my mom used to say she didn't want preservatives in our home. And so you can go and, creating these sort of rigid rules at home makes kids want to seek out those foods. On the same hand, exercise is fine and great and an important thing to be joyfully moving our body, but it can also become obsessive. It can also become part of an eating disorder. So you just want to be on the lookout for that. And so what's trending? Because of social media, we have to pay attention to this because these are things our kids are learning about and seeing and reading about. So first is this sunglass challenge. And this is something I was asked to talk about at Cosmo magazine because came up. I hadn't actually seen that, but then when I learned about it, it's really problematic. So this is a trend where people were trying to fit sunglasses around their waist to show how small it is. And it was a form of body checking and a form of body comparison, similar to these other ways in which people compare their bodies or compare their food or remark on what I ate in a day, which really can be problematic behavior. Another behavior and trend that we're seeing is this idea of protein maxing, where teens and influencers are focusing on increasing protein intake through foods and shakes and supplements. And, this is something certainly that I think my age group is, perimenopause, menopausal, we're hearing a lot about the importance of protein, and our teenagers are getting plenty of protein. Healthy teens actually get enough protein through a balanced diet. And so what happens for some people is they will then say, okay, I just want to shift my diet to, let me take out the bagel and cream cheese in the morning, and now I'm just going to have a protein shake. And instead of having pizza at school, I'm going to have the salad and chicken for lunch. And what happens is it's just not enough calories. So we just want to make sure we're getting balanced diet with protein and fat and carbs, and we're not putting so much of an emphasis on protein. Adolescents, actually half their plate should be carbohydrates, so grains and rice and things like that. And then, of course, we can't ignore the GLP-1s. And there's been a rapid expansion of GLP-1s being prescribed in teens. What worries me and my colleagues quite a bit is that the prescribing has really outpaced the safeguards. And they're general safeguards that we normally see for pediatric patients, where we generally have a rigorous safety culture. It just doesn't seem to exist here. And I think some of that is due to capitalism, and some of that is due to fat phobia, where these drugs have just been pushed to patients at unlike other medications. And so we just really have a limited amount of pediatric safety data. And so again, I just exercise caution. Adolescents in particular warrant a unique level of caution. So when should we be concerned at home, or when should you be concerned of like, maybe there is a problem going on with my child? So the first thing I want you to think about is the fact that behavior changes happen before physical changes. So what I'll hear sometimes from parents is like, but my kid hasn't lost weight. But if you're starting to see behavior changes, that's something to pay attention to. So when I say behavior changes, things that we can see with eating disorders at the start of them, is just food intake decreasing. And most parents know how much your kid normally eats. So some kids are just like, they've always eaten a small breakfast. But some kids maybe have eaten, normally have like 2 bowls of cereal, and now they're saying, I don't want to eat breakfast anymore. Or normally they would eat seconds or have 3 pieces of pizza, and now they're saying, I only want 1 pizza, or lunch is coming home. Those are things we want to pay attention to. We also may see them completely skipping meals or making excuses not to eat, because it can be stressful to eat when you're struggling with eating disorder. They may avoid social events with food. They may tell you, well, I'm eating healthy now. And healthy is one of these words that, I think we've really lost the plot on. So which is why I name what health is. But just again, as I said, like most patients come in to see me with an eating disorder, it is not that they wanted to have an eating disorder. Their intention was to get healthy. And so that they took information that they thought was healthy. And we just want to be thoughtful about the fact that they need a tremendous amount of nutrition. They are growing. You may see that your child is also cutting out food categories. So they may used to eat meat, and now they're saying, I don't eat meat anymore. I'm going to be a vegetarian. Or cutting out carbs or cutting out dairy, things like that. You may see that they're having more guilt or anxiety with eating. They may be using the bathroom after meals or during meals, and often that can be when there's vomiting or purging behavior happening. So that generally vomiting happens around 30 to 60 minutes after a meal. And so if they're quickly using the bathroom after eating, that's something to pay attention to. And increased exercise. Again, exercise is tricky because it's a great, important behavior. I think we put a lot of moral value on it in a lot of communities, and it can be too much sometimes. And so if your child is potentially like exercising when they're injured or exercising when they're sick or on their own, those are things to pay attention to. And then, so what are some of the physical changes to pay attention to? One is weight loss. Adolescents should not lose weight. So if they are losing weight, that's something that we want to pay attention to. They may be getting dizzy or lightheaded or faint. You may notice that they're cold all the time when other people aren't, or they're wanting to, wear layers. Or they may be complaining a lot of stomach pain or constipation. That's a common thing that we see when people are struggling with eating disorders. Or you may notice that they're cold or have bluish hands. And again, because the body is trying to protect itself. And so it decreases perfusion to the hands and to the feet. So you may notice that. At the end of the day, I would advise every parent out there to trust their gut. I can't tell you how often I hear, like, I had some concerns, but I don't know. I just wasn't sure. And I didn't want to make it worse. If you're concerned as a parent, I'm concerned. So trust your gut on that. And it matters because early intervention decreases morbidity and it decreases mortality. And so as early as possible, if you're concerned, you want to take your child to the doctor's office and get them help. The good news is our kids actually want us to do better in regards to this. So they want us to model a kind relationship with food and body. They actually want us to avoid weight criticism, even if it's well-intentioned. They want us to focus on health behaviors and not weight. And they really want us to buffer outside weight-centric messages. And they want us to do this with understanding and without blame. So what can parents do? So first we think about our bodies. And again, there's lots of more information about this in the book, so I don't feel like you have to learn it all here. But just being thoughtful about how we talk about bodies, how we talk about our own bodies. So noticing if we're saying things like, I feel fat, or I need to lose weight. And instead trying something like, my body helps me do so many things, or maybe not even commenting at all. Noticing how we talk about our child's body, even if we're saying something like, you look so skinny, in a way, because that can make them feel like, oh, skinny is good. Skinny is something I'm supposed to continue to strive for. And instead shifting our compliments to their skills and their kindness and their resilience and their character. And aiming to not talk about other people's bodies, including celebrities. This is something I think a lot of us do, is we'll be like, did you see so-and-so? She lost weight or he gained weight, and just trying to not focus on physical appearance. And then foods and meals, this is a great opportunity to talk about, excuse me, I got distracted there because I was thinking about Operation Parent, and I was thinking about just the value of having meals at home as much as we can, and the value of that, and trying to get cell phones out of the way, but also using this as an opportunity to just take morality out of food. So we're not talking about good foods and bad foods, but we're aiming to help our child feel relaxed and flexible about food, eating for balance and satisfaction, and listening to their hunger and satiety cues, and helping them to create structure but not restriction. And when I say that, I mean like family meals when possible, putting our phones away and making that like a standard acceptance, like this is what we do at the table. Trying to eat at a table in a chair, trying to have regular meal time, having things on a plate, not eating just like snacks out of a bag. That sort of structure tends to benefit kids. The best way to teach children about nutrition and to listen to their bodies is through modeling. And then joyful movement again. So things that we can do is we can help to take the morality out of movement. So we're not good if we exercised or bad if we didn't. Our bodies deserve care and not punishment. So how to talk about movement as a way to have fun and reduce stress, improve mood, and help with sleep, strengthen your heart, but nothing that we have to do to punish ourselves for something when we've eaten. So helping them value rest and helping to decouple exercise and food from appearance. Also encourage families to be mindful of the media and cultural messages our kids are absorbing, and helping them to get a little bit more critical with those messages so that they're not feeling a victim to it, but they're like, able to ask questions like, what is this ad trying to sell me? Or do real people actually look like this? Who's missing from this ad? Or is this filtered? Dove has incredible advertisements out there, just sort of highlighting what healthy messages could look like. But I encourage families to introduce diverse role models and really celebrating differences in media, and not being thoughtful if we're only looking at one type of show and TV and media with one body type. And then what about our schools? What can our schools do? So our schools can help to create weight-inclusive school environments. I have found it really impressive that, we talk about ways in which to make school environments inclusive for so many areas. And we talk about decreasing discrimination in schools. But weight discrimination is one of these things that's not talked about, and it's the #1 cause of bullying in school. is weight. So really trying to make it as inclusive an environment for everybody, normalizing eating. So yes, everybody eats lunch. In reimagining nutrition education, so teens are learning about eating disorders in nutrition and education in health class, and they're learning about balanced nutrition. They're learning about social media, helping them recognize eating disorder signs, and schools can develop clear protocols for support. And what about communities? So communities also have a great opportunity here to have inclusive sports. So we're prioritizing participation over performance. We're accommodating different skills and ability levels. We're focusing on fun and skill development. It's all for fun, right? Ultimately, and addressing weight-based discrimination. So we're not letting that persist in our in our communities. And encouraging health at every size principles in community fitness programs. So these are programs that emphasize movement for joy and health rather than weight. There's lots of diverse options for different interests and abilities. So not feeling like just because your kid can't catch, my kid can catch. There's lots of other ways for them to be active and find some joyful movement. In welcoming environments for people of all sizes, and having our health programs and community programs encourage sustainable health behaviors. Here are some books that are fantastic. If you're looking for more, How to Nourish Your Child Through an Eating Disorder. This is a great resource written by 2 dietitians that really help parents navigate eating disorders and understand what to feed their kid. This is like the one, if people want one thing, I usually recommend that book to parents. And then there's a great book written by a psychologist, When Your Teen Has an Eating Disorder. This also comes in Spanish and is a fantastic resource. And finally, the resource I mentioned that is great for teens themselves is No Way. And it's kind of a practical guide, and it's a teen's guide to positive body image, food, and emotional wisdom. Here's some additional resources. Like I mentioned, the National Eating Disorder Association, the Child Mind Institute, and Feast is an excellent organization for families whose children are in the trenches with an eating disorder, and they have lots of free parent support groups and education as well. We are going to have a Q&A. Yep.
Those questions have been coming in fast and furious, and we're
great
with you.
Excellent. I'm excited to answer your questions. Should we do that first, Michelle?
Let's go through your next slide.
Okay, perfect.
And then I'll talk about the book giveaway.
Okay, love it. So here is a slide that just has information if you want to reach me or find out more. So aspengroveayam.com, that's my website. You can reach out directly to my practice manager with questions, and then my Instagram is @LaurenHartmanMD, and I try to put out useful, helpful information for parents and teens on that. And you can also find me on LinkedIn. And here is the book, Freeing Children and Young Adults from Shame, Skills, and Stigma. And you can get that on Amazon or Routledge, which is the publisher. And really exciting is we're going to do a book giveaway.
That's right. So here's your chance to enter for that opportunity. There are so many thoughtful mentions in the book about having your home be body positive all the way around. And so that's one of the things I really loved as I read through her book. So Operation Parent is pleased to offer a couple of copies, and Dr. Hartman is also giving away a copy. So 3 people, 3 lucky folks here are going to win a copy of her book. And I can't wait for you to also have the opportunity to read it.
Great. And then I just want to say what a pleasure it has been to learn about Operation Parent. And I have really had the opportunity as well to look through the handbooks. And I just love how up to date and evidence-based they are, and comprehensive, and how many topics they include. So just such an incredibly helpful tool for families navigating today's challenges. So huge endorsement for them, for you all as well.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to let the audience know a couple more things about our handbook. So, just as you mentioned in the front end, Dr. Hartman, summer brings a change of pace to our homes, vacations, later nights, camps, and the benefit is more time together. It can also create more opportunities for conversations that might get pushed aside during the school year. So this webinar just feels like perfect time and place. Operation Parent, we have created our handbooks for covering topics like weight stigma, mental health, vaping, screen time, opioids, and so many more of the toughest topics that we're dealing with today. We provide evidence-based info, practical tools to help parents navigate through those tough things that they're facing. It's great for parents, grandparents, foster parents, kinship givers. You're going to find conversation starters and really helpful guidance. So this summer, I hope you'll take advantage of the extra moments together and utilize our handbooks to come up with simple conversations that can really make that lasting difference. This pop-up will allow you to explore our handbooks, and we hope that you will. Be sure to follow us on our social media channels. We hope you will join us for our upcoming webinars, July and August, and continue learning with us. We're so excited when you come back and spend some more time with us. We'd love your help in spreading the word. You can scan this QR code and visit our promo partners page. So this just lets you see webinar lineups and social media graphics just as soon as we get them ready. And for those of you that are representing organizations like drug-free communities and schools, these flyers are especially great for you to spread the word. Also for pediatricians' offices, since the American Academy of Pediatrics is joining us in August, it's a wonderful resource to have available for families in waiting rooms and offices if you are a pediatrician. We encourage you to share the flyers in places where parents will gather this summer. So that might look like libraries, schools, community centers, faith organizations. Our webinar flyers are available in both English and Spanish, and we are really happy about that. Every flyer posted, email forwarded, social media share helps us connect with more families and offer support. So we're incredibly grateful for those that are helping us and those that will in the future. So now on to questions. Exciting. Okay, we'll start here with what do you recommend about finding balance between healthier options and budget restrictions on food allowances? Processed foods tend to be cheaper on a budget. So what are some of your great advice there?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And, again, speaking of morality with foods, food options, I see that too with thinking like somehow processed foods are bad. I mean, processed foods or, can-based foods are convenient and easy. And, my aim for families is just to decrease the stress in your home. So, I would say doing things that work for your family and, that can be, processed food. It takes a lot of energy to having all these fresh foods and creating these, recipes. It doesn't need to look like that. And there can be like, we're doing this on this day and this on that day. So I would say trying to take the stress off of yourself and knowing like if you can show up and actually show up at a meal. And when I say show up, I mean like us showing up. So our phones are away and we're present and we're engaged with our kids. Like that's what matters, rather than whether or not they ate out of a can or a package or something like that.
That's good advice. And I think like some of our best dinners at home have sometimes been with leftovers. It's just like it's their favorite food and they are pumped about that. So that's great advice to make the food menu easy on yourself, as well as everything surrounding the meal. Like I think moms put a lot of pressure on themselves to make that, just a big deal. And sometimes it's the simplest nights that are the best for you and your kiddos.
Absolutely. And we were talking before the webinar began about Trader Joe's and how many incredible options they have. And they have great things in their freezer section that are already prepared dinners and things that we can just quickly heat up. And they tend to be really cost conscious. So that's really great too.
That's awesome. So there were a couple questions. You did a great job speaking about boys and girls. So this question is about boys. Do you have any other resource ideas for boys with body insecurities or body dysmorphia? And then there was additional thought about that. Just how do you work with them kind of without overstepping or overdoing it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say in terms of resources, for them themselves, I really like No Way. No Way, it doesn't matter what the gender is. So, and it's WEIGH, so like way. So I think that just is a nice guide for all teens. And, I do think that in terms of not overdoing it, I would say to not feel like you can't bring it up because it's uncomfortable. These topics tend to be uncomfortable to bring up. So, regardless of gender, depending on your kid, it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable at first, but I don't think that means you shouldn't do it. And, to give yourself a break that like, even if that first conversation doesn't go perfectly, you can try again. And so I would just say to your kid, again, using some of those potentially like indirect approaches, like, hey, I was just learning about how eating disorders are really common in boys. Did you know this? Or what are you thinking? Or what are you seeing? Did you know that? Like it's actually rising really high in boys. And some of that is because of what they're consuming on social media and maybe what they're seeing in terms of protein or influencers, but like, let me know what you're seeing or what your concerns are. And then, I do think an important first step, if you're having more concerns, is just to say, I don't know, as a parent, like, let's just check, see what the doctor thinks. Like if you're having concerns that they might be losing weight or having disordered eating, checking in with the doctor, and sort of naming your own humility and naming your own, like, I'm learning too with you, but I love you and I'm concerned and I'm hearing that this is rising in boys. And I just want to make sure you're safe and healthy and that you're growing strong and that your bones are growing strong. So, just let's learn together with the doctor. And, I recommend talking to the doctor ahead of time if you have any concerns, just so that they know what your concerns are.
Oh, that's right. I remember in your book, you mentioned to pre-call the doctor's office before your appointment to help get some of that out of the way, and then the chart before you get there. I thought that was an awesome idea.
It's really helpful from the doctor's perspective.
Good. That's great advice that helps us as parents. So as boys and girls go through their growth spurt, what are some ways that you can keep an eye on, that being a natural part of their growth versus if things could take a shift there? Like it might be a little harder to notice because they are growing so fast. Their body's changing, like they might be getting taller, leaner really quickly. Versus like they might start to be making some choices about food that are not healthy.
It's such a good question. I would say one thing is just to recognize the fact that like puberty happens really differently for different people in terms of pace and in terms of timing. And for most teens, especially girls, gain weight during adolescence, during their growth spurts, and during puberty. So what I'll hear sometimes from parents is something like, well, my kid's growing, so I think that's why they're losing weight. But in fact, they should be gaining weight when they're growing. Adolescence is also the most metabolically demanding time. So this is when they actually need a tremendous amount of nutrition because their body is doing so much development and so much growth. So I would say to recommend, because I think it can sometimes be hard for our eyes if we're seeing our kids every day to be like, I don't know, are they losing weight? Are they doing this? But rather I would aim to keep your eye on the behaviors of, are they eating the way they've eaten? Are they like, oh, I'm so hungry because I'm, doing this game and they're grabbing something else as opposed to like cutting out foods or missing meals. Those are the things I would pay attention to because during adolescence and during those growth spurts, they should be eating more, not less.
Oh, such good advice. How do you arm your kiddos up with body confidence prior to those changes starting and prepare them for any comments that they might receive from family or friends, during the change about their body or the difference while they're changing?
Yeah, there's that great, I don't know if let me see if I can go back a little bit on the, this is, this resource I love for young kids. So again, I think earlier, letting them have resources ahead of time can be really helpful just in terms of body changing. Sorry, I'm looking for the, hold on one second. Resource, what did I do with it?
Which one are you thinking about?
It was the educational resources. Hold on, hold on, I'm almost there. Okay, here we go. Thank you. Perfect. So I love this one for elementary school age kids. So again, because puberty happens different time for different kids. And for some people, that's elementary school. So love your body, and just recognizing how our bodies change. I think as early as possible can be really helpful. I think starting to have these conversations, even saying like, you know what, when I went through puberty and my body changed, that was hard. Like, what are you noticing or what are you concerned about? Like our bodies do change. And I think there was maybe part of that question that also asked like kind of arming ourselves for maybe external comments, because that's something I hear a lot is, families may feel like, okay, we sort of nailed this in our home. And then, in terms of how we talk about bodies and how we talk about food, and we're doing a good job in terms of neutralizing and thinking about our bodies in terms of function. However, then we have grandma come by and grandma is like, are you going to eat that? Or making comments about people's, oh, you've gotten big. So I do think as parents, similarly, and as Michelle can say, I say this in the book as well, like prevention is really helpful. So even sending a message ahead of time, like, hey, here's something we're trying to work on in our house. We're not actually talking about weight or bodies or calories, because we have found it to not be helpful and we have found it to actually harmful. So like in our home, can you please do this? And if they say something like in that moment, kind of trying to shift the conversation. So I think it's okay to have those boundaries in your home so that our kids aren't getting influenced in a way that feels unhelpful.
Yeah, it's so good. And when those comments come up at any point, like you mentioned on other things too, processing that with your kiddo in the evening, just to help them finish thinking about that and, what they could say if something like that comes up again. Great question from the audience about, do you usually recommend that moms talk to daughters, dads talk to sons, or that there is obviously that can't happen in every home if you're a single parent, but just like in general, what is your recommendation on that? Or maybe take it a step further, like ways that dads could talk to their daughters or support their daughters, and moms their sons? And
Yeah, it's such a good question. I do honor people's own home systems, and like, your system best. There are some families that I was like, this mom is really good with these conversations, and she's going to have them regardless of the kid's gender. Or, maybe it's a dad who's, has a lot of ease with this. But I will say, I actually was just talking, there is an incredible, his name is Kevin Dunn, Dunn, and he is a parent coach. His kid had an eating disorder, and he has worked his career now helping mentor and coach parents through this. And he does a beautiful job with dads, because I think what he has really raised the awareness on is this opportunity for dads to learn how to have these conversations and how to show up in a way that's really, really helpful for their kid. So, I have seen just the beauty that can emerge when dads have a little bit of coaching and have some of these tools, or have read a book or read, and they're like, okay, I want to help out in this regard as well. I will say, on the flip side, I've also seen, I give a lot of talks about eating disorders. And what I often notice is that moms are the ones who come to the talks. And I have actually was just talking to Kevin Dunn about, like, we need to bring more dads to the talks, because what I'm hearing from is that it's the dads who are maybe focused on their own bodies and their own fitness, and that's negatively influencing their kid. And so, they're the one focusing on the protein intake and sort of the like weightlifting. And so their kids are getting obsessive as a result of the way the dads are talking about it. So I do think this is an opportunity, one, for dads also to think about how they're modeling their own behaviors around their kids, and for dads to learn some of these tools. It's 2026. We have to bring dads into this conversation and teach them supportive ways to be having this conversation. So I love when dads are interested. And, of course, an eating disorder is the last thing I want a family to experience, but I just continue to see the beauty that emerges when families are in that, and then they learn these tools and they learn these strategies, and they shift the way in which maybe they've been communicating before. And some of that is dads feeling more equipped to have the conversations.
Oh, that's really good. Really, really good. And, I was just thinking from like the dad perspective or the mom perspective, if you have been over exercising, what that's modeling to your kiddos, and that there's always an opportunity every day to talk about those things and look at it and shift it a little bit.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to shift gears here, but we got a suggestion from the audience that I absolutely love. So their thought was spend some time this summer going to the library and looking at the cookbooks or checking cookbooks out. Let the family help with the meal planning, and that could be like a really fun, affordable way. I think most of us get in a routine of kind of maybe cooking the same things or getting the same things from the groceries. So that could really help a mom out, like with someone else choosing some of the menus and getting creative with that. So I love that idea. And that same person mentioned that Operation Parent has posted on social media recently about some fun ideas of cooking with your kids, letting your kids participate in the cooking process. And that's quality time together, side by side, connecting, that they really, with your kids would love that. Obviously, on the age that they are and everything else, you got to work around that. But thank you for that suggestion from the audience. Do you think having kids read food labels as they get older is helpful in awareness and making healthy choices, or do you not recommend that?
I tend to not recommend that. It can get a little bit into the category of calorie counting, which can be quickly lead to a bit of an obsessive behavior. And, I try to encourage young people and everybody to feel some ease with nutrition. And I think sometimes the label checking can make us feel a little bit obsessive about that. The book that I mentioned, which I'm going to bring up on here on the left, How to Nourish Your Child Through an Eating Disorder. What they do a beautiful job on in this book is they do it based on a plate. So we're not looking at how many groups of this or how many grams of this, but rather like, what does a plate look like? So, kind of taking a plate, and for kids, half the plate should be carbohydrates. And then we're having protein in there, like a quarter of it being protein, a quarter of the plate being fruits and veggies. And then we're having a dairy and we're having a fat in there. So it just kind of brings some ease to it. They have nice real examples, but I find label checking can make us feel a little bit obsessive the same way checking a scale or checking calories can.
It's good. And that plate imagery is so beautiful for those of us that are visual, and for kids too, I think.
Totally. And I recommend this book in the paperback as opposed to the audio, just because they have tons of pictures and they have tons of different cultural appropriate meals. So it's not like just American meals. They also have a book for adults. So it's How to Nourish Yourself Through an Eating Disorder. So if this is something that you are dealing with, they have a version of that for yourself.
All right. Excellent. How do you encourage healthy eating habits with athletes in sports that have either previously demonstrated a high risk of eating disorders and in the competitive, ultra competitive sports too?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and it's such a important question, and something I deal with a lot with my patients. I see a lot of really high competitive elite athletes, and it's often because it's just such a demanding, intense energy expenditure with athletes that it's hard to keep up with the nutrition. And so, often we'll see this mismatch where people are losing weight it's completely accidentally. That's not the intention. It's just because they're burning so much in their sport. So I think the first thing is just bringing up the awareness of in order to fuel, you really have to eat like an athlete. And it's different than eating like maybe your friends or eating that your parent eats. You're not eating like an adolescent athlete that needs tremendous amount of nutrition. Mm-hmm. So, we'll say at least 3 meals and 3 snacks. Making sure that, so it's breakfast, something between breakfast and lunch, you're having something between lunch and dinner, you're having dinner, you're having something after dinner. We're making sure that you have drinks with your meals, that you're making sure all your meals and snacks have protein and fat and carbs. So I would say fruit doesn't count as a snack before your sport. You have to have fruit and cheese and crackers or something to make it just more balanced. Mm-hmm. Wendy Sterling, who is one of the authors who wrote this book on the left, is an incredible dietitian that focuses on athletes. She's worked with the Warriors and worked with the A's and the Jets. And I think she does quite a lot of virtual work for people if they're looking for a dietitian that works with athletes, but she's incredible. And one thing I learned from her, well, 2 things also. I've learned a lot from her, but 2 things I'll just share right here. One is chocolate milk. Chocolate milk's an incredible snack or drink for people who are athletes. It's just a really nice thing to have after your sport, before your sport. So I would say if you have an athlete at home, adding some chocolate milk. The other thing that she'll say is just to make sure we're having, and this is not just for athletes, but for all kids, A, B, and C's with nutrition. So the A is it's got to be adequate, meaning like it has to be enough. And that's why I love the visual of the plate, because we don't want this teeny plate. Like this is like a 10-inch plate. It has to be adequate. The B is balanced. We want to make sure it's balanced. We're having like the protein, the fat, and the carbs. And the C is it's consistent. So, we're not going hours without eating, but we're eating really consistently. And so athletes, it's like, okay, if we want to do in our sport, we just have to nourish ourselves appropriately for that, or it can get really unsafe pretty quickly.
Good advice. Let's see here. We found a matching question. A little bit of a different track, but great question. If I'm seeing signs in my child that are leaning toward eating disorders, what's your best recommendation to start getting professional help?
Yep. So I would say the first step would be to take them to see their doctor. The first thing is we want to make sure that they haven't lost weight. Adolescence, like I said, is a time where you're supposed to be gaining weight. So that's a really important first step, is to start there. Make sure that they're checking their heart rate and their blood pressure. Sometimes we're also checking labs to make sure that there's no, complications that way. I will give you the caveat that there's not that many doctors that are trained with eating disorders. So a lot of pediatricians, you have your general training, but you don't necessarily have extra training with eating disorders. So if you're concerned about your kid having an eating disorder and the pediatrician's like, they're fine, don't take that to mean that your concern is not appropriate or valid. It just may mean that they may not have that expertise. And so, you can seek more support. You can ask the pediatrician if they have someone that they recommend who has specialty in eating disorders. Also, two of the resources that we shared, I'm going to put it back up on the screen, which is NADA, NEDA, the National Eating Disorder Association.org, and FEAST has lots of resources in terms of your area and people to see.
Okay, we have good practices in our home, but when grandparents are around, it's a different story. They often talk about their own calorie deficit diets and how much weight they have lost. What's the best way to address this?
Yeah, it's a common question and a common concern, and why I included like literal scripts and emails and text in my book is because people were like, shoot, grandma's coming and I know she's going to say something about my teen's body. Or like, a friend of mine who said, I know my mom's going to come and then she's going to comment on how much rice everybody's eating. That's her thing. So, I do think as much as you can say it ahead of time, like, hey, this is something we're really working on. We're not focusing on bodies. And so in our home, can you not talk about that? And just leave it as that, as clean and simple. And this is something that we're really moving away from. I will say, and I can send this to you, Michelle, once I develop it, but I'm working on some resources because some people have asked me to have just like something they can just put up in their house, like, like a little sign of like, we don't talk about calories, we don't talk about weight, we talk about joyful movement, we talk about that all bodies are acceptable, things like that, just to have a little bit of a reminder when the family visits. But I would say as much as you can, saying something ahead of time. And then if your mom or grandma or whoever says something, just say, hey, by the way, we're trying to not talk about that anymore. And just trying to sort of shift that conversation, but it's hard and it's real.
It's so good. It's so good to have grace with them too, because I'm sure a lot of times their intention isn't to be hurtful, right? And they may not know all the things going on behind the scenes. So just do your best to continue to extend that grace and have these conversations, and then after conversations when something goes out of line a little bit. Okay, so do you mind if we talk a little bit here before we close about an audience member asked, what if your child is very overweight? I see a lot of what not to do or say, but what can we say to get them to know that weight loss can help them be healthier?
So I guess what I would say in this regard, and it's such an honest, thoughtful question, and I can feel and hear the love in that question, is, will say, when we focus on weight as the goal or weight loss as the goal, that in and of itself hasn't been shown to be helpful. So, I really try to focus on health behaviors that impact everybody. And so things like, first I will say, for some people at a higher weight, that's where their body wants to be. So I think the first thing is just understanding, do they need to lose weight? Maybe they don't. Maybe they've always been at a higher weight curve, and that's where their body and genetics are supposed to be. And so it's maybe we don't say anything. But if there are concerns, I would say aiming to focus on, again, healthy behaviors that help everybody. So things like, how are they interacting with screens? Is there an opportunity for them to spend less time on a screen? Because often when we're spending a lot of time on screens, we saw this a lot with COVID, and we saw kids gaining a lot of weight. Some of that was just the sedentary behavior in their time on the screens. So, shifting away of how do we just sort of turn off the screens and have some limits to that? It's how do we make sure we're getting outside every day? And, what is mealtime looking like, so that we're aiming for structure, and we're not saying you can't eat this, you can't eat that, because that tends to not be helpful. But let's just make sure we're sitting in a chair and having a meal together. Or, making sure we're eating out of a plate. We're thinking about things like stress reduction, because when kids are really stressed, they tend to use food as a coping strategy. So I would say often I find the most helpful thing is actually navigating mental health, because that can be, sort of getting to the root of the matter, and food tends to be just this Band-Aid and the soothing strategy. So I hope that's helpful, but it's really sort of thinking about behaviors that we know are healthy, because unfortunately, when we just focus on weight loss, sometimes kids tend to do unhealthy behaviors to get there, or they're hearing this message that actually is making them feel worse about their body. And instead, when we're thinking about things like stress reduction and joyful movement, and what's fun to move our body, and how do we just get outside every day, those sorts of things help everybody's health.
That's awesome. And I think too, just remembering as parents, dinner time doesn't have to be everyone at the table at the same time. It could be a very special dinner with mom and one of the kids, or dad and one of the kids, that you're just routinely, someone is sitting down at the table with someone, and there's some connection there. We have a great resource in Kentucky, and I believe these are all over the country, the Dinner Table Project. And so you can look up websites, and they often have newsletters where they're shooting out menu ideas and prevention information for families. Just being together is prevention in itself. So make that as easy on yourself as possible, and just know that time is the most important thing.
So true.
Well, that's excellent. Very great. Thank you so much for your time and everything you've put in to developing this webinar and what you do for families every day. We're so proud of your work. So thankful to know you, and we look for our next opportunity to work together.
Thank you for having me. It was such a pleasure to collaborate with you all. Thanks for joining, everybody. We got this. We're not alone.
That's right. Together we will prevail.
Yep.